All right, so today I'm here with Louie. He spent over 27 years working for the U.S. Department of State, and from 1987 to 1996, he was involved in U.S. affairs in Yugoslavia. Good morning, Louie.
Morning.
Can you please state your full name for the record?
Louis Sell.
And today's date is May 18th, 2024. So Louie, we're going to start today and just talk a little bit about the time that you served in the U.S. Embassy in Belgrade, which is from 1987 to 1991. Which was also the last 4 years before the country dissolved into war. So can you just start us off and tell us a little bit about how did you get there and what was your role at the embassy at this time?
My role, I was the political counselor, head of the political section in the embassy. It was, for me, it was a return to Yugoslavia. My first overseas post had been in Zagreb, 1974 to 76. So it was nice to get back. I always liked Yugoslavia. I always said that, my time with Soviet Union or Russia, that was intellectual, and the time with Yugoslavia was love. I had an affection for Yugoslavia in the way it was hard to do for Russia or the Soviet Union, especially when we were adversaries in the Cold War.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, what was it the love that you say you felt for Yugoslavia?
Well, it was just Yugoslavia was a very beautiful and a varied country, the people were enjoyable, there was just some and it didn't have a lot of the tensions that went with being in the Soviet Union. Efforts on the part of the regime to limit your access, concerns about compromise or security and that kind of thing. Some of that was there, but not in the same way. With Yugoslavia, it was more just a fascinating place to be, and really your ability to get involved in it, to try to understand it, was just simply limited by your own time and interest.
Mm-hmm. And so, as head of the political section, what were you in charge of doing in Belgrade, and what did that look like on a daily basis?
Well, as in any embassy or any political section, we had two major responsibilities. One is you're there to report on political developments in the country, report back to Washington, and the other is to represent the interest of your own country in that country, political interest in Yugoslavia. And so both of those were important, really. And Yugoslavia had an outsized role in international affairs. It was a Balkan country of 20 million people, yet because of the role it had carved out for itself as a communist country, but independent of the Soviet Union, with broad interest in the developing world because of its leadership role in the non-aligned movement. So, you could be in this sort of small Balkan country, yet you thought it was in a country which of global significance as well.
Mm-hmm. And so we know that when you were in the Soviet Union, you had to work a lot with dissidents and you focused on human rights. Did you do a similar type of job when you were in Yugoslavia? I imagine it probably looks quite different.
To some extent. I mean, our approach was a little different in that, to be honest, Yugoslavia was for one thing, well, it wasn't as repressive a country, at least by the 1980s. It was a communist country. There was only one political party allowed, and that was a Communist Party. And there were things you could and could not say. But it was nowhere near as repressive as the Soviet Union. And to be fair, we didn't necessarily look at it in the same way. So human rights began to be quite important in Yugoslavia as the country headed toward, as internal political troubles mounted, and especially as a country headed toward danger and disintegration, and as problems developed in Kosovo, human rights became more important in our agenda, although not always in a helpful way, frankly.
Mm-hmm. And so we do know that Yugoslavia ended up disintegrating in that time that you were there.
Right.
What are some key incidences that you witnessed, you were part of, that you remember from that time period?
Well, so things that I witnessed. I mean, the disintegration became the rise in political difficulties began leading toward disintegration early on became, if not evident, at least alarming and worrisome with the rise of Slobodan Milosevic. And Milosevic really, in '87, Milosevic, who was a typical Yugoslav communist apparatchik before that, who no one had really ever heard of or paid much attention to, he discovered the power of Serbian nationalism to advance his own career when he went to Kosovo in April 1987, and ended up he ended up dealing with a crowd of angry Serbian minority in Kosovo, believing that they were being mistreated by the Albanian majority, and Milosevic kind of stepping in and calming the situation and uttering these famous words to the Serbian crowd in Kosovo: "No one will beat you anymore," because the cops were all around and were perfectly prepared to disperse that crowd in the typical way Yugoslav police did. But he stopped that, and that was the beginning. And I wasn't there for that, although I later became friends with the Kosovo leader, Azem Vlasi, who was there, who described it to me in great detail. So Milosevic kind of worked his way through to Serbian nationalism can further my political career, and I can use it to move first to take full control in Serbia, ousting his friend and mentor Ivan Stambolic in the process, and then having gained control in Yugoslavia and Serbia, which is the largest republic in Yugoslavia, to try to use it to take control in the rest of Yugoslavia. This was 7-8 years after Tito had died, and so cracks were starting to show in that system, and the economic difficulties were accumulating, political difficulties were accumulating, and Milosevic saw how he could use those to his advantage, but eventually also saw that there were limits to how far you can go. If you want to take over Yugoslavia, Serbian nationalism takes you up to a point, but only so far, because Serbs they were not a majority. They were a plurality in Yugoslavia, but not a majority, and they were not anywhere near. Serbs were not present in some of the Yugoslav republics, which you'd have to take control of. So Milosevic rode Serbian nationalism as far as he could, and then when he saw the limits to that, around 1989, he basically decided he's going to use that to destroy Yugoslavia, break it up, try to recreate a new country where all Serbs could live in one country, knowing full well that it was going to lead to war, quite a destructive war. And so a good bit of my time there was watching this and observing it, and reporting on it, both from what's happening and trying to get Washington involved. What should we be doing about it? And why can't we do more? It was it was a fascinating and unhappy process in many ways. Obviously, to see a country which I cared for kind of disintegrate in that way, and see people people descend into a kind of a form of madness in a way.
Can you describe that a little bit more?
Well, what can I say? The one event in waymark, let's say, in that process is June 1989, June 28th, 1989. That's Serbian holiday, and it's I'm almost exactly 2 years into my stay in Belgrade, and by then Milosevic has taken control of Serbia, and he's also taken control of Kosovo in a quite illegal and violent fashion, and provoking their immense unrest in the rest of Yugoslavia, and leaders in other parts of Yugoslavia are really coming to grips with it. Number one, they had Milosevic, who was trying to take over the place, which they could not allow, but eventually coming to the conclusion that the only way to prevent that was to go along with the breakup of the country, and in some cases, like the case of Slovenes, to encourage it. But June 28, 1989, Milosevic spoke in Kosovo. It was the 600th anniversary of the defeat of the Serbian forces by the invading Ottoman Turkish forces in the Battle of Kosovo Puglia, and which is kind of thought of as the end of the medieval Serbian Empire and Serbia's incorporation into the Ottoman Empire. So 600 years or 500 years under Turkish rule. It didn't quite happen quite that quickly, but in any case, it's one of the most important dates in Serbian history. Serbs are a little bit unusual in that they celebrate their greatest national defeat as their national day, kind of like if we made Pearl Harbor Day our national holiday. You can think of, if we'd done that, if we ever did that, probably our feelings toward the Japanese wouldn't be all that great, would they? So the Serbian feelings toward the Albanians, who are the majority now in Kosovo, were not that great. But he was coming there to give a speech.
Before you talk about a speech, though, do you have any thoughts, having spent quite a bit of time in Belgrade, as to why they do celebrate as a national holiday one of their greatest defeats?
I think it's just the way that Kosovo is so totally wrapped up in their own identity, and Serbia has this concept of itself as both the imperial state of the Balkans, or that part of the Balkans, but also, yes, at the victimization state that's always a victim of international invaders and stronger powers. So it's all wrapped up, and it's wrapped up in the fact that they regained control of Kosovo in the early part of the 20th century in the Balkan Wars, but then lost it again, in their view, to some extent in Yugoslavia, because the Albanians were a majority. So it's complex, and I really think basically when it comes to Kosovo, really foreigners just can't walk where Serbs walk. Really can't do it completely. You can kind of understand the facts, and you can kind of understand the backdrop, and you can witness it, but it's hard to put yourself in the same position, really, and how illogical and irrational it can be, and even if they know it is, right now there is no Serb leader who really wants Kosovo back in in an operational sense. They don't want 2 million Albanians voting along with 6 million Serbs in their elections, But there is no Serb no Serb leader at least, who can stand up and say, yes, let's acknowledge it's gone. It's just impossible.
Did you ever ask any of your Serbian friends if their perspective on this holiday?
Not really, not all that much. I mean, it's sort of ironic. They all make jokes about the things. June 28th, it was the Battle of Kosovo Polja. It was also the day that Gavrilo Princip assassinated Archduke Francis Ferdinand in Sarajevo that very day, setting off thereby World War I. So it kind of passed. It's also the date, by the way, that my oldest daughter, got married on June 28th. So it's not just bad things that happen.
So were you actually present at Milosevic's famous
in the speech, we go back to the speech, June 28 rather, 1989, he had taken control of Kosovo. He had abolished he changed quite illegally the Serbian constitution, ignored the Yugoslav constitution, ignored and abolished the Kosovo constitution, and using police and military power basically had suppressed Albanian rule in Kosovo, the majority of the people within the Yugoslav system, and taken it over by the Serbs, again, at least ostensibly still within the Yugoslav system. And he was coming down on June 28th, 600th anniversary, basically to give a speech to celebrate this. And it was a big deal. So there were at least a million Serbs coming there at this field, Kosovo Polja, also called Gazi Mestan, where the battle is, just outside of Pristina. And almost all of those Serbs had come from outside of Kosovo. There weren't anywhere near that many Serbs in Kosovo. They'd invited diplomats to come, but he deliberately did not. He disinvited the American ambassador, my friend, Warren Zimmerman, my boss and friend, really, because Warren was leading the charge by then on Serbian misbehavior, human rights violations in Kosovo, and made it clear that Americans were not welcome. I went anyway, just drove down there and kind of lurked around and watched it. And it's quite interesting to see. There were 1 million Serbs out there in this field and this podium, and I was kind of hanging around by the podium. Milosevic was late. He came by helicopter, and he was late, a couple hours late. We later learned, because they discovered, or so they said, a possible assassination plot on the way down, and so diverted and came by helicopter instead of driving. But he landed from this helicopter, came out. There's this crowd, already quite restive and standing in this hot sun for hours. He saw the helicopter come down, and Milosevic gets out, goes onto the podium, and he gives this speech, which is kind of beginning, at least, a hymn to ethnic toleration, and how Yugoslavia, socialist Yugoslavia, needs to respect everybody, etc. And we later learned that most of it was written by his wife, who, unlike Milosevic, was a true believer in Yugoslav communism and was a nasty piece of work, frankly. And she was kind of responsible for some deaths of journalists, I think, opposition journalists. And that's not what the crowd was there to hear. They were angry Serbs on Kosovo. We have Kosovo back, and they wanted to hear that. And whether that was in the text or not, but sensing it, that Milosevic then kind of shifted gears and essentially he said something like, we're now and there's Yugoslavia is facing conflicts. Those conflicts so far have been peaceful, but we can't exclude that they will continue to become peaceful. They may turn to armed conflict, and that's what they wanted to hear. They wanted to hear war, the crowd, and they just let out this huge roar as soon as he said armed conflict, and that was quite instructive. And indeed, 2 years later, there was armed conflict.
Were you surprised by that reaction, or having been in the environment for a little while, did you kind of sense that that was the increasing sentiment?
I don't know if he's exactly surprised, but it's striking for sure. Mm-hmm. It really is striking. I was more surprised by his very kind of in the beginning, this Orthodox Yugoslav communist kind of beginning of his speech, but no, it was somewhat surprising, but more ominous than anything else, I'd say.
Yeah. Would you say that there were multiple events like that happened that were kind of an early warning sign that it was going to devolve into an all-out war?
Sure, there were.
Yeah, that you personally witnessed.
There's as time went on, it got more and more things, more and more kind of slid in the direction of losing control. And some of it was open, you could see some of it underneath the surface. What events can I point to? I mean, one is when as Milosevic cemented his control, he took control of the small Yugoslavia's smallest republic, Montenegro, and our notion of Montenegro, should it be separate? Now it's an independent country, but is there a separate Montenegrin identity, or are the Montenegrins just Serbs who happen to be taller and lazier? He instigated the overthrow of the Montenegrin communist leadership, and this young, actually quite interesting and dynamic young leadership took over Montenegro, but they just quickly turned into a purely nationalist there, as well as everywhere else. How the process of Serbian nationalism provoked counter-nationalism elsewhere. And so 1989 is the year that communism collapsed across Eastern Europe, and not in the same in Yugoslavia, albeit in a different fashion. In 1989, Slobodan Milosevic was charging toward take over Yugoslavia, blocked when his efforts to take over Slovenia failed. There are almost no Serbs in Slovenia. It was bound to fail. 1990 was the year of the communist leadership basically lost control of the republics within Yugoslavia, and how nationalism substituted for it, so that in 1990, you had democratic elections, genuine democratic elections in most of the Yugoslav republics, first in Slovenia, the Slovenes were genuine Democrats. They wanted and did create a democratic Slovenia, but they wanted no part of staying in Yugoslavia. They wanted to leave as quickly as possible, knowing that if they did, if Yugoslavia started to come apart, it would provoke violence, if not in Slovenia, then elsewhere. So they were in some ways almost as responsible as the Serbs for the violence, even though it didn't actually happen. There was no violence and Slovenia, but they're kind of like in the proverbial crowded theater. Someone stands up and screams fire, and they happen to be standing right next to the exit door, and they run out the door and leave the rest of the people in the crowded theater to their fate. And that was the Slovenes. And in Croatia, but the democratic election was inspiring. It was a genuinely democratic election, produced a genuinely inspiring group of leaders, many of them liberal communists. But then in Croatia, you had the rise of Franjo Tuđman, a Croatian nationalist. I went up to observe the election in Croatia as I had in Slovenia, and I stayed with my some Croatian friends, a Croatian lawyer. Sorry, I played in an amateur basketball team when I was in Croatia. A bunch of lawyers, and we didn't win many games, but we could sue the other team if they got too rough with us. So I stayed with Ognjen, his wife, Jasminka, beautiful. She was a Miss Yugoslavia, and they were both good friends. And I got there for the election, and he first words he said, "You see now, we Croats can have our own Milosevic." Mm. And just talking about it, and Ognjen was a convinced Croatian nationalist to the extent that he always wanted Croatia to be independent. He like many Croats, even under communists, he didn't think it belonged as part of Yugoslavia. Certainly should not be ruled by Belgrade. Yet he couldn't bring himself to vote for the most attractive candidates. In some ways were the reformed Croatian communists, and said, I can't bring myself to vote in our first democratic election. I can't bring myself to vote for the communists. And nationalism in Serbia quickly provoked counter-nationalism in Croatia, and that was April, or I guess, of 1990. And you started off this ping pong back and forth of action, counter-reaction, and some of it was which provoked nationalism, but also provoked fear on the other side. So you got this cycle of action, reaction, apprehension, fear, reaction to fear, provoke fear on the other side, an example, which I use in class a lot, and in the spring of 1991, Kathy and I, and our youngest, Lizzie, we went to Germany for a few days for a break, and I paid, having spent months, literally, doing nothing but following what's events. I paid no attention to anything that was happening in Yugoslavia while we were up in Munich at the American Army base there. And we came back, and we wanted to see, there was a town in Kosovo we wanted to see. There's a famous cathedral there, beautiful cathedral, actually built by one of the founders of the Yugoslav idea, by a Croatian bishop who wanted to create a unified Yugoslavia, which all Southern Slavs could live. So we went off the main highway and drove up to this town, and everything. And we got to the town, and it was all quiet. The streets were empty. There were police everywhere, and clearly something had happened. And we found it's a tiny place, so we found the cathedral, saw it, and started to drive back down the small country road to the main highway leading to Belgrade. We came to this barricade, road barricade, and I was driving in our red van, the same red van that was in 1993. I was driving in Moscow later, and so that all Yugoslav men had to serve in the military. They all had military training, and this roadblock was done very professionally with wood across the road. And there were guys in the hill right by side with armed watching, and stopped us, came up and sort of leaned their Kalashnikov in the window. That was the accepted style, I guess. And said, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" I said, "I'm American. I'm an American diplomat. What are you doing here? What's going on?" And what's an American diplomat doing here? Well, I said, "We're just coming up to see the cathedral, and we're going back to Belgrade. What are you doing here?" And they said, "My goodness, how could you miss it? We're here to protect our village." I'm not sure I can get the sequence right, but so they said, "We're here to protect our village. The Ustashi have taken over the next village down the road, and we're here to protect our families against the Ustashi." So they were Serbs, and Ustashi were the Croatians in World War II, and that was a derogatory term for Croats. That's an ethnically mixed area we were in, for sure, in the Slavonian region of Croatia, ethnically mixed. And they were saying basically that Croatian nationalists had taken over the village, and they were just to defend their families. And I said, "Well, we just drove through there a few hours ago. I didn't see any Ustashi, but I need to go. That's the only way I can get home. Can I go?" And they said, "Well, it's up to you, if you want to run the risk." And so I said, "Okay." And so we drove on, and a couple miles, not too long, couple 3 miles, I don't know how far exactly, came to a roadblock in the village. Same drill, Kalashnikov in the window. "Who are you?" "I'm an American diplomat." "Oh, we love Americans. What are you doing here?" And I said, "Well, what are you doing here?" And I'm sort of paraphrasing. And they said, "What? How could you miss it? We're here to protect our village. The Chetniks have taken the next village, and we're here to defend our families against the Chetniks," which was a derogatory term for the Serbs. And and I know still they were responding to press reports of a truly ugly round of violence in not too far away, which had happened, I guess, the day before.
And what year is this?
1991.
Okay.
It's May of 91. And they were both wrong. There were no Ustashi or no Chetniks in either village. They were clearly armed men there. They had their Kalashnikovs, but that was not too uncommon. But within 2 months, it was true. By July, that area had succumbed into war, ethnic violence, and ethnic cleansing, and there was ugly violence. So it was fear, which had the effect of provoking action on the other side, and then counter-reaction, and initially fear of the unknown and wrong, but leading ultimately to real consequences.
Yeah. And when did you leave Yugoslavia? Didn't your tour end in 91?
In July or June 99. We were leaving then. I went to this summer. It was as Yugoslavia was dissolving into war. My term had come up. There was another man coming to take my place, and I was going to Moscow So we had the political section there.
Okay, so you left just as it was about to
Just as it was
disintegrate the war.
disintegrating into conflict,
Mm-hmm.
just as it was. And you know, people understood that if Yugoslavia did disintegrate, there was going to be conflict intellectually, but it was not till the very end that people really were forced to confront with the reality that those fears.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, we knew it was going to disintegrate. In some ways, at least a year before. For the last year of my time there, people would ask me, they would ask me, what do you expect for Yugoslavia? And I said, it's war's coming. It wasn't until this time that the reality of it hit, frankly. And it was and my Yugoslav friends felt the same way. And you know, I mentioned there was this ugly incident of violence that took place, which provoked this behavior of these villages, and it was in that area, not too far away, a village called Borovo Selo, which was, I think, May 1, 1991, and Croat nationalists, kind of, and it's a mixed village, mixed area, and Croat nationalists kind of attacked a village and ultimately captured part of it and captured some police who were Serbs. Whether they're police or paramilitary, I really don't know. Maybe a bit of both. And then they killed him in really ugly ways, really ugly. And then that was reported, and it was Borovo Selo, which convinced a lot of my Serb friends in Belgrade that, yeah, it is war. It is war.
Well, we will finish in our next video how you actually came back to work on the peace process. But thank you for your time today, Louie.
Thank you.